Bills Mafia. Tonight on the Air Raid Hour, we are previewing the 2025 NFL Scouting Combine specific to the needs of the Buffalo Bills. Stay tuned. This is one you won't want to miss. But first,
welcome to the Air Raid Hour, a Cover One Network podcast. Here are your hosts, Judge Mathis and Tilt Money.
welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to the Air Raid Hour. My name is Steve Mathis. You can catch me on Twitter at the Bills Guys, joined as always by my co-host Dave Tilton. You can catch him on Twitter at Tilt Money. This show is presented by Picasso's Pizza and the Cover One Sports Network. And Dave, so far this offseason, we have broken down the Bills roster position by position. We have done a comprehensive Senior Bowl review. We have previewed free agency specific to the Buffalo Bills needs. And we have revisited the 2024 draft class and talked about its impact on this offseason. Now it's time to move on to one of our favorite things here, and that is the scouting combine in Indianapolis.
Yeah, like we're kind of past the season in review sort of stretches of the offseason, that time kind of between the Super Bowl and the combine. And this is where things really start to accelerate for us, right, as a show, and really for a lot of Bills fans that are interested in the offseason activities, right? Because we've got the combine coming up. Shortly after that, you got the free agency window opening, and then leading up from free agency right into really the meat of the home stretch of draft season once April hits. So this is a great time of year for us, obviously, for getting good content out to all of you, but also really helps us kind of, let's say, forget about kind of the pains of the season prior and really focus on the future.
Yeah, a lot of stuff is going on behind the scenes all week in Indianapolis. Sean McDermott spoke to the media today. The competition committee was meeting, and that's why he was late. They're talking about the whole tush-push thing and arguing that in Indianapolis. Defensive line prospects could start meeting with teams today, which is something that's super interesting for the Bills. They will meet with the teams again tomorrow as well. So some of the behind-the-scenes stuff has gotten started already. The on-field stuff, the stuff that we get to see, the TV coverage, that starts Thursday with defensive linemen and linebackers. Defensive linemen, that's a big deal to us as Bills fans. We're going to spend a huge portion of this preview show talking about the defensive line, whether it be edge rusher or interior defenders. So Friday you get the DBs and the tight ends. Saturday, quarterbacks, wide receivers, running backs. Sunday is offensive linemen all to themselves. You can catch all the workouts on NFL Network. Daniel Jeremiah does such a great job, and really all of the guys covering the combine for NFL Network do a great job sort of giving us background stories and analysis on some of these prospects that we have not heard before, right? They do a great job Senior Bowl week sharing some of these anecdotes and these stories and these player comps and all these things as well. So to me, at least as a fan of the NFL draft, it's an invaluable weekend for me. I'm sure it is for draft lovers. It's going to be a ton of fun.
Yeah, and it's a really nice mix of kind of both, right? We do get hung up, and we do obviously pay attention a lot to the actual hard numbers, whether it's the metrics of the actual results of the workouts or the attributes of the players themselves, height, weight, wingspan, hand size, all that. But like you said, hearing some of the stories too, some of the more qualitative stuff about these guys from people who've had a chance to interview them, people who have had a chance to talk to them, that is really interesting too, because it can kind of start to kind of frame a little bit sort of more of a, I guess, fuller opinion, if you want to call it that, on the guys that are, of interest to you as Bills fans. So, and there's going to be a couple guys like we talk about tonight, like one guy that sticks out to me, Ahmed Hassan from Boise State. Was born in the U.S., moved to Egypt when he was 6 years old and came back. And there's a great interview on the Draft Network There's a great interview on the Draft Network by Daniel Mello, who always does a good job with interviews. And so stuff like that, you get to really kind of put it all together on Combine Week.
Yeah, looking at it, 329 prospects. We are not going to be covering them all this evening as much as we want to. Instead, here's the game plan for what we have in store. We're going to start in a moment by highlighting some of the things to be on the lookout for behind the scenes. This is players who enter Indianapolis with character and health concerns, who need to prove themselves to teams. Then we're going to move on to the freaks, and we're going to talk about the athletes who are expected to put up some insane testing numbers to keep an eye out for in Indianapolis. And then to close out the evening, we're going to get to key positions: wide receiver, edge, interior defensive line, cornerback. And we're going to talk about players we as Bills fans should keep an eye on. And if we have some time at the end, we will get to some other position groups as well. Before we get into the meat and potatoes of tonight's show, a quick word from our sponsor. Well, maybe not a quick word from our sponsor.
What's up, y'all? Khalil Shakir here. When I want buffalo pizza, it's got to be Picasso's.
Khalil Shakir.
Am I frozen? Can you hear me?
Your team, our pizza. Picasso's. This is Buffalo Pizza.
Not sure if we lost Judge there, but yep, looks like we lost him. So he'll be back. Obviously, show's brought to you by Picasso's and the Cover One Network, and we'll just give Judge a second to come back here. So look, one of the things we're going to start talking about tonight as Judge comes back on before we kind of get into our main topics of the night, or some of the other things that maybe we kind of gloss over a little bit before we get to the Combine, but we will talk about tonight. And that's some of the guys that maybe you have some character concerns, some red flags, and other guys that maybe have some medical concerns. And we'll kind of go through a couple of those. And here's Judge. He's back.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on. I'm connected to Ethernet, but for some reason my system glitched out there.
Yeah, you're at the Picasso's ad played. It was fine. So we're
all
good.
Right. We kept the sponsors happy. So my apologies. Yeah, segment one here. I'm sure you've already sort of teed it up, but the NFL Combine is just as much about what goes on where we cannot see than it is where we can see on TV. Interviews are going to be key this week for so many guys. We've seen them play a huge role in the drafting of Kyrie Elam and Keon Coleman, and we didn't really know the extent to which the Bills had interest until those Bills embedded episodes played after they were drafted. Medicals are also a huge thing. Every year, guys we think are going to go high end up dropping because of injuries that we don't even find out until after the draft. So let's start with some character concerns. And Daniel Jeremiah and Dane Brugler were really the ones who started dropping hints this week about what to expect in Indianapolis this week and some key guys who might have something to prove. It starts with 3 guys up front on the defensive line that could drop to the Buffalo Bills at 30. Number 1 is Mike Green, the exciting edge rusher. We had conversations about him during Senior Bowl week. He was kicked off the team at Virginia for sexual assault allegations. It's not like he hit the transfer portal and left. Like, he was legit kicked off the team. He had some issues in high school with some sexual assault allegations as well. So he's going to have some things to answer to with teams. James Pierce Jr., not so much like criminal stuff, but attitude and work ethic concerns. I know some of his teammates like Joe Milton have already come to his defense on social media this week, but he's got some things to answer from a work ethic standpoint. And Dane Brugler dropped Walter Nolan out of Ole Miss this week as well. No real specifics on the issues related to him, but these are 3 guys where we kind of are now expecting all 3 to be gone by the time the Bills get to 30. Character concerns could slide these guys in round 1.
They could slide them, and obviously each team's going to do their own diligence, right? And that's part of this whole interview process during the week is, right, you have this chance, really is your best chance as an organization to really dig into some of these guys from a behind-the-scenes standpoint, right? Everyone's going to get the same data on the field as far as the measurements, all that. The interviews are going to be a little bit more nuanced. Not every team's going to ask the same questions. You might not get the same answer from similar questions from each guy might answer a similar question differently from different teams. So you just don't know. And these types of things, really, you have to trust that your organization is strong enough around some of these guys that have some of those concerns. In the past, Brandon Beane and co have been averse to taking players that have any some sort of like off field or sort of non-medical related concerns, I would say. But at some point in time, you have to trust your organization and the guys in the building that if someone does enter your organization in your locker room with maybe some questionable past, like you also have to be about giving guys second chances in some of these cases too, and trusting that your culture is going to overcome. So not saying that any of these three are gonna end up like that, but that's just something I think we need to think about as well.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. The Bills last year losing all the guys that they lost, from Jordan Poyer to Micah Hyde to Mitch Morse. It almost seemed like they really prioritized character and leadership. You know, Dwayne Carter winning the academic Heisman, being a captain. Cole Bishop was a captain, I believe. Keon Coleman, no questions about his work ethic at Florida State and what a kind of a film junkie he was. They picked character guys up and down the draft. Ray Davis, I think everyone's pretty well acquainted with Ray Davis's upbringing and his story by now. I think that was in large part due to the fact that they lost so many veterans. So it'll be really interesting to see if this year, if a Mike Green is sitting on the board, if a James Pierce is sitting on the board, if a Walter Nolan is sitting on the board, if the Buffalo Bills are willing to take a little bit of a risk, right? Obviously, we don't know what's going on behind the scenes. We don't know the details of what went on with Mike Green at Virginia in high school. We don't know the attitude problems that James Pierce Jr. or Walter Nolan might not have. But if the Bills feel maybe a little on edge, maybe they do take a chance, because now they feel like the locker room has been rebuilt to a point where, hey, we're going to go add the most talented player. Even if he might clash a little bit with this culture, we need that impact player from day one. So who knows? The decision is going to loom large for the Buffalo Bills at 30 if one of these three guys drops, though.
And look, if you think that one of those three guys is going to be an impactful player and in a situation where you think that they probably should have been a top 15 talent, let's say, or top 20 talent, and you need to add difference makers to your team, you might do that. I mean, I think that's, if you go back to the 2021 draft, like we were talking about last week, you could make the case that that's kind of maybe what happened with Gregory Rousseau, right? When he had that dominant freshman year and then sat out for the COVID season. Like, there was a lot of people who thought that had he played that year, he could have been a top 15, top 20 pick. And so the Bills felt like, okay, we're going to get a, top half of the first round talent in Gregory Rousseau at pick 30 because of some other, extenuating circumstances. Maybe that is the case here with one of these three guys.
On the flip side, you also have medical concerns. And I did my best to go through and try to find a lot of the guys who were dealing with medicals. It looks like you added someone else to the show notes here that I missed as well. And I found the common theme when I was looking through the injuries. When it comes to DB Day on Friday, going to be paying a lot of attention to the stories that they are telling about some of these defensive backs, because a lot of them are dealing with injuries. Will Johnson, the Michigan cornerback, he missed a lot of last season with a turf toe issue. He's got some long speed concerns that he needs to quell here at the combine. He could see himself dropping a little bit, probably not to 30, fingers crossed, maybe he does, but he's got something to prove. We'll see if he even tests. A guy who will not be testing, but will be interviewing, and his doctors have reported that he will be good by the time summer rolls around, training camp rolls around. That's Savon Revel Jr., the cornerback out of ECU. He's dealing with the ACL. So it'll be really interesting to see just what they have to say about him this week, because he will not be on the field testing. Benjamin Morrison, another cornerback from Notre Dame who could be on the Bills' radar in rounds 1 or round 2. He's dealing with a hip injury, and that's pretty concerning. So the medicals on a guy like Benjamin Morrison are going to be pretty important. Quincy Riley's got an ankle. Maxwell Hairston had a shoulder injury. Kevin Winston Jr. was dealing with an ACL. So a number of defensive backs that the Buffalo Bills could have interest in, they are dealing with injury. There are other guys who might have some chronic injuries that leak over the course of the combine as well, and some may never leak. So there's always instances on draft day where it's like, how is it the 4th round and this dude is still on the board? And it turns out it's because of medical issues. I remember Marvin Wilson Jr. was the big one. We were like, he didn't go, he went undrafted, and we were perplexed the entire weekend that Marvin Wilson Jr. went undrafted, but it turned out to be medical the whole time. And he hasn't really done much in the National Football League because of that medical issue.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, we just watched him keep dropping like a rock during that draft process. And he was a popular player that Bills fans were interested in, and it just absolutely derailed him in that draft and didn't get drafted. So, and there's a couple other guys, obviously, too, that I'll be paying attention to. Torrey Horton from Colorado State, the wide receiver, had a season-ending knee injury in October, and I'm very interested in what he does here at the Combine. I like his game, as we'll get to what wide receivers tonight, and as a day 3 option, it's an important. Generally, what I'm saying is, if you have had an injury, this day is important. These tests are important for you to just show at least that physically in the drills. I know it's not football activity, right? But drills, running, jumping, all these things to show that you can at least clear the minimum thresholds that you have to show these guys that you are healthy. And of course, as it's been said in the comments section, your own scouting department is going to have check these guys out. Maybe a question about the medicals in the interviews as well. Some of the details about the rehab or things of that nature. But yeah, for guys who are coming off injury, definitely a big week.
And I'm really interested in Josh Simmons as well, the Ohio State offensive tackle. He obviously tore his ACL week 7. Probably not going to do any on the field stuff, but I'm looking for an update on his medicals, because it's not like the Buffalo Bills need an offensive tackle, but it sure would be nice if his medicals came back clean and he ended up coming off the board before pick 30, because that would drop a talented player at another position like defensive line or corner to the Buffalo Bills.
Wasn't there like an offensive lineman from Arizona State or something a couple years ago that fell because of medical? Or was
I remember David Ojabo tore his ACL, the Michigan defensive lineman, during his pro day.
Yeah, that was pretty bad. Someone in the comments will know. There was
Lyle Collins, the LSU guy who got like the arrest rumors like the morning of draft day and ended up going undrafted.
I'll figure it out. There was a guy that we liked a couple years ago, an offensive lineman that ended up dropping like a rock in the draft. I think it was the Terrell Bernard draft. I have to go back and check, but anyway, just saying that because it can drop you in the draft. And you can find value, but also you could end up in a Marvin Wilson situation where it just doesn't work out.
Medicals dropped, have dropped guys like Nakobe Dean in the past, and they dropped some other guys who end up having really good careers as well. So it's both sides sort of argument here with some of these medicals. Every team is going to have different opinions. Up next, we're going to talk about the freaks a little bit. And Bruce Feldman does us a favor every year. He drops his freak list, and he does a really good job just scouring the college football landscape for some of the freakiest athletes in college football. And we're going to go through some of those guys tonight. And we're going to talk about guys who are going to absolutely blow up the combine from a testing perspective. These are the guys that everyone's going to be talking about this weekend. Every year, sort of to preview that, like I mentioned, Bruce Feldman's freak list tracks the biggest freaks and other athletes in college football. Obviously, there are some top picks that are going to impress. I think Abdul Carter just said he's not actually working out this weekend, but he was sort of my example of a guy who's going to blow up the combine, and it doesn't really matter because the Bills aren't going to touch him. Travis Hunter, I think, is another example of a guy who's going to blow up the combine, but the Bills have no shot. So we're going to, again, keep this Buffalo Bills specific. And let's start with the freaks on the interior of the defensive line, because there's one guy in particular I want to talk about. Some of the names that made Bruce Feldman's freak list that we could possibly end up talking about tonight: Kenneth Grant, Tyleik Williams, Darius Alexander, Joshua Farmer, and Jordan Phillips. Grant is going to be, in my opinion, Kenneth Grant, the defensive tackle from Michigan, is going to be on every Bills fan's want list this year. He is already on every Bills fan's want list, and he will be even more so after the combine. The issue with him, and this issue comes up every year, we fall in love with these guys early on in the process. Each and every passing day as we get closer and closer to the draft, his ceiling makes him likely more of a high-end draft pick and unlikely to be there for the Buffalo Bills at pick 30. I remember our guy Darnell Wright a couple of years ago, who ended up going to the Chicago Bears, I think just outside the top 10, was the guy that we thought was for sure be there for us, and he wasn't. Kenneth Grant is entering that type of territory. This is what Bruce Feldman had to say about Kenneth Grant. The former unheralded recruit from Indiana began wowing the staff almost from the moment he set foot on campus, causing Jim Harbaugh to rave about the then 360-pounder running a sub 540. Grant, the number 3 on their freaks list in 2024, has been clocked at 18.7 miles per hour on the GPS while weighing 350 pounds. Last offseason, he vertical jumped 29 inches. He had 32 tackles, 6.5 tackles for loss, and 3 sacks and 3 quarterback hurries to go with 5 passes broken up in 2024. He is the crown jewel, I think, for most Bills fans right now.
Yeah, and PFF has him as right now as their number 23 overall prospect. And as you see in the comment section, Pete's saying Grant's probably a top 20 pick, so that fits. And look, I mean, again, we take these things with a grain of salt because every year there's some surprises, or every year there's guys that get picked sooner than we think. Every year there's guys that get picked later. And you just wonder about Kenneth Grant because you see how much of an impact some of these interior defensive linemen are having in some of the biggest games of the season. And you wonder if just because in the past, maybe an interior defensive lineman, you would have a guy like, a Simmons or someone like that, who's like, yes, he's a top 15 type of pick. It's not often where it's an interior defensive lineman that is that high. We saw Jalen Carter with the Eagles obviously fall into their lap. It's not a ton, right? So it just going to depend on sort of how things shake out. I'd love for him to get there. And I'm not so worried about like whether people think he's only a 2-down player or not. He certainly would be very, very high on my list and probably would be the pick I would make if he was available.
I mean, there was an image today of Jordan Davis standing next to Jalen Carter from like the Super Bowl, like as the confetti was coming down, and somebody commented, believe it or not, the guy on the left-hand side of this photograph is 6'3", 315 pounds. And that was Jalen Carter, who looked small compared to Jordan Davis standing next to him. Just imagine Kenneth Grant standing next to Ed Oliver, right? And some of the things that a guy like Kenneth Grant could do for Ed Oliver while at the same time not sort of giving up anything in terms of pass rush. He's more than just a plugger. Somebody in the comment section, Noah Sheldon, comes in and says Tyleik Williams is more realistic. This is what Bruce Feldman had to say about Tyleik Williams, who came in at number 11 on his freak list. The Buckeyes had a terrific D line, and the 6'3", 327-pound Williams was its anchor. He had 8 tackles for losses and 46 tackles for the national champions, and should excel at the combine. Despite his massive frame, I wouldn't be shocked to see him run the 40 and the 4.8s and clock a 10-yard split under 165. The 10-yard split is so important here because Sean McDermott said today, right? He was talking to Josh Reed of Channel 4. What do we look like? What do we look for in defensive linemen? Explosion was one of the first words that came out of his mouth. And I understand a lot of what he says is coach speak, but the fact that he was like explosion, right? That's 10-yard split. So for a guy, Tyleik Williams size 6'3", 327 to have a 10-yard split at 165, that's pretty darn good. And the knock on Williams is he a 2-down plugger, which is still something the Buffalo Bills quite frankly need next to Ed Oliver. But could his testing numbers make teams believe that he can play all 3 downs? And that's the type of thing that you want to consider with Tyleik at pick 30. If he's a 2-down guy, is he worth pick 30? Because the Buffalo Bills might be like, if he unlocks Ed Oliver, yes, that's worth it to us. And then Dwayne Carter can come in on 3rd down with Ed Oliver and we'll be fine, right? The Bills could just be like, it's just a perfect fit. I don't care if it's 2 downs. It's a perfect fit. We love it. Pick 30, good. But if they don't think he's a 3-down guy, it also might take him off their board at 30 and push him into the 2nd round. So I think a big combine here for Tyleik, especially that 10-yard split.
Yeah, I like Tyleik a lot. I do think he's a more realistic option at 30 than Kenneth Grant just because of availability as far as who might be there. I'm actually not so worried about like whether they think he'd be a 2-down or 3-down guy, because at the end of the day, the Bills really rotate 4 guys anyway on the defensive line. So it's like, if you pick a 3-down guy, like, is he going to be on the field anyway, all 3 downs? Are you going to like, so because of the way the Bills run their scheme and run their personnel, and they really need to have kind of 4 solid defensive linemen through that rotation. Like, I'm fine if Tyleik Williams ends up being the heir apparent to Daquan Jones, if that's the guy they want to take at pick 30, even if he is a quote 2-down player because of the way that the Bills rotate in. And so look, yes, maybe it's like in certain situations, you'd play him on early downs. In certain situations, maybe you play him on late. Like, okay, fine. But at the end of the day, like, he's still probably anyone on this Bills defensive line is probably not going to be playing more than 65% of the snaps anyway.
We got John Robert coming in and says, have you seen if Elijah Roberts is any good? The 3-tech out of SMU had a big shrine week. I don't think he would be on the Buffalo Bills board, quite frankly, John, just for the fact that he's kind of the Dwayne Smoot type, Quentin Jefferson type. Is he an edge? Is he a defensive tackle? If he is a defensive tackle, he's a 3-tech. I think the Buffalo Bills are looking for bigger guys. Maybe a guy like Elijah Roberts could make sense to them on day 3 after they've already drafted a guy, or if they get a guy in free agency. But some day 3 guys that I'm looking at based on their athletic testing. 2 names from Bruce Feldman's freak list stick out to me. Joshua Farmer from Florida State. This is what Bruce Feldman had to say about Joshua Farmer. The 6'3", 316-pound redshirt junior was a disruptive presence in the middle of the Noles' dominant defense in 2023, recording 32 tackles, 7 tackles for loss, and 5 sacks to go along with 2 quarterback hurries, 2 pass breakups, and 1 forced fumble. Farmer has gained over 50 pounds in his college career. This offseason, he clocked at 19.6 miles per hour in pads and has also cleaned almost 400 pounds, squatted over 600 pounds, and benched over 400. Even more impressively, he had a Nordboard score, which measures eccentric hamstring strength, of over 2.3. For context, that is higher than you would typically see from any skill position player. So a guy like Joshua Farmer could be a day 3 steal as sort of a 2-down plugger next to Ed Oliver. And then one of the guys that I've really fallen in love with this draft process came in at number 51 on Bruce Feldman's freak list. And that is a guy whose name you're familiar with because we've already had one in the pros. And that is Jordan Phillips out of Maryland. I already talked about him during Shrine Bowl week. 20 years old, right? 20 years old. Mike Loxley, the head coach at Maryland, didn't have to think too long. This is what Bruce Feldman has to say when asked about Maryland's biggest freak. It's the 6'3", 320-pound sophomore who began his career at Tennessee. The kid is a man-child, Loxley says. He's explosive. He's a former Alabama star turned first rounder. He's explosive. He compared him to Deron Payne, who was the number 11 overall pick from Alabama in 2016. He's a nose tackle, but he's light and he's so twitchy. Phillips, a former standout wrestler and a weightlifter in high school, started 10 games last year for the Terps, making 28 tackles, had 1.5 tackles for loss. He squatted 665 pounds, power clean 365, and did an overhead bench press of 365 pounds for 2 reps. I could see Jordan Phillips sneaking into the back half of the second round. So if the Buffalo Bills decide to go to another position in the first, I think Jordan Phillips is a guy they could circle back to in the second round. The Bills sometimes like to go younger and look for that upside. You mentioned Gregory Rousseau at the top of the show. I think Jordan Phillips fits that mold.
Yeah, he certainly does fit that mold. I would be very happy with getting him at any point sort of in this draft. He's ranked currently just outside the top 100 on PFF's big board, which basically puts him sort of as a late round 3, early round 4. But I do agree with you, depending on sort of have people fall in love with him. A late second round, it would not surprise me with him if people fall in love with that athleticism and the age, right? The one thing you would say is, like, at that age, is he going to come in and impact the game right away? I think he could, right? And I've seen a couple Bills fans, several Bills fans online kind of making the case like, hey, like, should we be thinking, and I think you made this case too, like, should the Bills be thinking maybe about looking into maybe not the younger prospects and looking into more mature, older prospects that can come in and impact right away? But I think Jordan Phillips could come in and impact right away and then still be only 24, 25 years old when it comes time for that second contract. So you also have to think of it that way. If you hit on him, you're potentially getting 8-9 years in his 20s on your football team at impacting the interior of that defensive line. And as we know, interior defensive linemen typically age well in the NFL as far as continuing to be impactful. So yeah, I'm on board.
Shifting now to edge rusher, the freaks at edge rusher. And again, we're just sticking to Bruce Feldman's list for now. We'll get to some other guys as we roll around and get specific to each position. But some guys who ended up on Bruce Feldman's freak list along the edge: Shamar Stewart, Jordan Birch, James Pierce, Mike Green, Nick Scorton, Princely O'Melian, Mikael Williams, David Walker, Landon Jackson, and Baron Sorrell. A bunch of guys stick out to me. Mikael Williams, should teams for some reason pass on him? I think he checks so many boxes of what Brandon Beane loves. This is Bruce Feldman's write-up of Michael Williams. He struggled the sophomore season to get rolling because he was injured early in the year and he was out of the lineup, but he was back and ready to roll at midseason when Georgia went to Texas and got after the Horns. Williams had 2 sacks and a forced fumble in that victory. Later in the season, when the Dogs faced Texas again, this time in the SEC title game, he had 2 more sacks and 5 quarterback hurries. He finished the season with 5 sacks, 8 tackles for losses. The 6'5", 265 pounder with 34 plus inch arms is expected by Georgia coaches to run the 40 in the high 4.5s or low 4.6s. Michael Williams is a physical freak, kind of up there with like the Groots of the world, but even more of a freak than Groot. If he somehow slips to 30 because that injury sort of slowed him down a little bit this year, big time performances and big time games, which checks to Brandon Beane's box. Young checks Brandon Beane box. Physical freak has all the measurables, checks the Brandon Beane box. I think we're sleeping on Michael Williams if he's there at 30 and you're the Buffalo Bills.
I mean, you mentioned it. He's still not even 21 yet. Turns 21 in June. Yeah, the sack production maybe hasn't been there for him. Took a dip in 24. Was there as a freshman when they won the national championship in 2022. And in interviews and in discussions with Kirby Smart, and as people have kind of gotten into the scouting on him, Kirby Smart has had nothing but good things to say about Michael Williams as far as in the locker room, work ethic, and that certainly sounds like it checks a lot of boxes for a guy like Sean McDermott. He would be a high character type of guy. If you were talking about guys that had the concerns off the field, he is the exact opposite. He is the guy that has probably one of the highest character guys in this draft. And he's not even 21 yet. So yeah, big fan.
The next 2 guys on Bruce Feldman's list that I want to talk about, I don't know, maybe I'm Boogie Basham pilled right after that pick a couple of years ago. I've kind of soured on those bigger, like, are they 5 techs or are they edge rusher type guys? But there are 2 physical freaks in Jordan Birch out of Oregon and Nick Skirton out of Texas A&M that could be intriguing and could be on the board for the Buffalo Bills at pick 30. Bruce Feldman had this to say on Jordan Birch. Like Stewart, Birch is another former 5-star recruit who has been inconsistent but figures to shine at the combine. Birch was more productive, notching 11 tackles for loss in 10 games with 8.5 sacks and 6 passes broken up while battling some injuries. Last offseason, the South Carolina transfer added 13 pounds to his 6'5" frame to weigh 295 pounds as an edge rusher and still vertical jump 35 inches and hit 20.75 miles per hour on the GPS. Skirton was the Big Ten sack leader in 2023 at Purdue. The 6'4", 280-pounder was voted a team captain at 19 years old, something that should really intrigue a guy like Brandon Beane. He transferred close to home at A&M and led the Aggies with 5 sacks in 2024 and had 14 tackles for losses, 1 fewer than he had in 2023. His old defensive line coach at A&M, Sean Spencer, thinks Skirton's 40 time could be in the 4.7 range, but adds that his agility numbers will be fast. And agility numbers of that size is pretty intriguing. I think both of these guys are much better athletes than Boogie Basham was. Again, still might be a little Boogie Basham pilled. What are your thoughts on Birch and Skirton at their size as an edge rusher?
Yeah, both transfer guys, as you mentioned. Skirton, to A&M and Birch to Oregon. But you look at some of the numbers for these guys, and Skirton, 19 tackles for loss and 16 sacks combined over the past 2 seasons. He had 10 sacks in 2023. He's a top 10 in pass rush win rate per PFF of all draft eligible edge players with at least 250 pass rush snaps in 2024. So you like to see some of those advanced metrics coming through on the win rate. And then you look at Birch, right? Played both sides of the line for Oregon, played the left side, played the right side, 8.5 sacks you mentioned, 6'6", 295, so even bigger than Skirton. He did play fewer snaps, as you mentioned, with some of the injury stuff at Oregon, about almost half as fewer snaps at Oregon as he did in his last year at South Carolina. So last 2 seasons for him, only 428 snaps and 426 snaps respectively. But some of that was injury related. And I think both have I would say both have better ceilings than a Boogie Basham, but you got to be careful, right? I think it's if you're investing in one of those guys, it may be that they are the second of a double dip potentially, right? Or that you've already gotten a guy like Michael Williams and you're going to pair up a smaller sort of bendy or edge rusher with a larger length and strength type of guy. But it just depends, right? I like both of these guys. And I also got to, when you transfer, right? And then you show that you can up your production after transferring, that says a lot to me because a lot of guys want to like transfer, obviously, for the playing time. But then for it to actually translate on the field to better production, that I keep a note of that when, especially for guys who have transferred.
Another length and strength guy, polarizing figure for me. I wasn't really that high on him because of leveraging issues. I feel like he gets too tall at times, but his preseason write-up from Bruce Feldman really piqued my interest. And that's Landon Jackson out of Arkansas. This is what Bruce Feldman had to say about Landon Jackson before the 2024 season. The former LSU Tiger player was named a first-team All-SEC player by the league's coaches in 2023 after making 13 tackles for losses, 6.5 sacks, and 44 tackles. Jackson gave Alabama fits last year, notching 11 tackles and 3.5 sacks in one singular game. And that, to me, I think would stick out to Brandon Beane, especially if there was a Bill scout on hand at that game in 2023 when Landon Jackson popped off. That's something I think the Bills might make a note of. And they're typically at those Alabama games. At 6'6" and 281 pounds, Jackson has topped out at 20.4 miles per hour. Last month, he broad jumped 10.2, had a 34-inch vertical, and in the weight room, he power cleaned 350 and benched 375 and squatted 505. So again, another physical freak in Landon Jackson for the Buffalo Bills to consider. I think he's more of a round 2 conversation guy.
I agree. And I mean, 6'6", 6'7", whichever. I mean, the dude's lengthy, right? And, the reporting was that he kind of started out slow at Senior Bowl week practice, but turned it on as the week went on and obviously culminated into a good showing during the actual game where he did have a strip sack in the first half in the actual game. So certainly a guy that kind of improved as the week went on in practice there, especially because of the just volume of defensive linemen in this class. It's good to see a guy that has that type of length being able to make an impact on the game. So yeah, he is very intriguing to me. All three of those guys, actually, we just mentioned are really intriguing. And it just kind of, as we continue going through this freaks list, you're going to, it's like the trend here is that there are a lot of defensive linemen freaks this year. And that's a good thing for the Bills with having those 2 second rounders. So, man,
we still got 2 more. And one of these guys I had earmarked as one of my favorite 4th round prospects for the Buffalo Bills. But now I'm starting to think he could end up just like Jordan Phillips, working his way all the way to the Buffalo Bills in the back half of the 2nd round. Now, am I saying he's a 2nd round player? No, but when you're in the back half of the 2nd round, you're kind of that 2nd, 3rd round tweener. And I could see David
and you
Walker.
don't have a 4th round pick.
Yeah, and you don't have a 3rd round pick. Yeah, David Walker,
third round pick,
from Central Arkansas, moving himself into day 2 of the NFL draft. He's been getting I've seen the Brandon Graham comps from a number of people. And this is what Bruce Feldman had to say about David Walker, who had a huge week at the Senior Bowl. The 3-time FCS All-American and 2-time Freaks lister piled up 63 tackle for losses, 31 sacks, and 6 forced fumbles in 3 seasons and 34 games. The 6'2", 260-pounder should test well. Last offseason, his 40-yard dash time was 4.59 seconds to go with a vertical jump of 36 inches and a 385-pound power clean. David Walker, I think, is a guy that maybe we're sleeping on a little bit here.
I think we are, and I did my first mock draft, didn't share it with anyone today, and I picked David Walker with the Bills' second round pick today, and PFF gave me an F grade on it. So there you go on that. And yet it's odd because they have him ranked as their 106th overall prospect, and they actually have him rated as their number 1 overall edge player in 2024 based on their grading. He was 20th in 2023 and 2nd in 2022. So like they've liked him, they've graded him, they've graded him well. And you mentioned the production. Just this is the guy that is your Javon Solomon potentially of last year, right? Where he has the production at a smaller school in Central Arkansas, almost 40 sacks in his career. and had a sack, by the way, during the Senior Bowl game as well. So very, very intrigued by David Walker. And certainly if the Bills found a way to maybe get themselves back into the third round somehow, I think I would be pretty comfortable pulling the trigger there on him in that area.
I'm always looking for players too that are maybe being slept on. And a guy I don't hear talked about a lot in this draft is Barron Sorrell out of Texas. I think maybe with all of these freaks and all of these defensive linemen, maybe the Buffalo Bills could luck out. And if they miss on an edge rusher in, rounds 1 and rounds 2, maybe a guy like Barron Sorrell out of Texas can drop to round 4. There's a couple other guys when we go back to the defensive line and just talk about other guys in the combine that I think could possibly drop to the 4th round as well. But Barron Sorrell, Bruce Feldman says the 6'4", 260-pounder clocked one of the fastest max velocity times of any D lineman in college football last fall when he hit 19.4 miles per hour during a game. Texas coaches are excited for Sorrell to take his game to another level after he had a terrific offseason. Sorrell bench pressed 425 pounds, squatted 575, power clean 355, but coaches say the most impressive number is his explosiveness and burst for his size. He's consistently registered 20 mile per hour on the catapult system. Again, Sean McDermott used that word explosion and get off when talking to Josh Brown today about what he's looking for in defensive linemen. Barron Sorrell could possibly, with his testing numbers, check those boxes in Indy this week.
Yeah, and they used him a little bit too as an inside pass rusher in certain situations as well, playing about 72 snaps in the B gap last year, 50 in the B gap in 2023. So they did move him inside a little bit as well, even at his size. He finished with 9 sacks and 29 hurries in 2024. So pretty good production from him on that Texas line. So yeah, I think he's being slept on, ranked right outside the top 100 right now for on PFF's board. So right in sort of that late 3rd, early 4th range. But I could see him being a 3rd rounder if someone really kind of falls in love with his game.
Let's move to the next level of the defense, and let's talk about linebackers just a little bit. I don't want to spend too much time on linebackers because I think at the end of the day, I think fans have a very hard time wrapping their heads around the Buffalo Bills selecting a linebacker early in the draft, given the fact that you're pot committed to Matt Milano, right? Healthy or not, salary cap wise. You have Dorian Williams behind him, who the Buffalo Bills invested a 3rd round pick in. You have Terrell Bernard in the middle of that defense. The Bills have some linebackers, and not to mention they only play 2 at a time. So it's very hard to find a spot on the field for the Buffalo Bills to add a linebacker and get that player onto the field. But there are 2 linebackers, and this position is not valued the way it used to be valued. And they could somehow be sitting on the board for the Buffalo Bills at 30. And it will be so incredibly hard, I think, for Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott not to pull the trigger on either of these guys. The first is Jalen Walker, and Jalen Walker gives you a little bit of versatility because some people question whether he could be a Nolan Smith type edge rusher. At 6'2", 245 pounds, this junior out of Georgia was a problem for offenses. This is according to Bruce Feldman, as an off-ball linebacker and as a ferocious pass rusher. His closing speed is scary. Walker won the Butkus Award as the nation's top linebacker after making 60 tackles, 10.5 tackles for loss and notching 6.5 sacks. He dominated Texas in 2 games, producing 6 combined tackles for losses and 4 sacks. Georgia coaches think he could run in the 4.4s in Indy and a vertical jump around 36 inches. Jalen Walker's just a beast, kind of like some young, who is that linebacker in New England forever? Jamie Collins. I'm not thinking of Jamie Collins. I think I might be thinking of someone else, but it's like some of that Jamie Collins vibes to his game, right? And then you have Jihad Campbell out of Alabama. First of all, Jihad, Sean McDermott's going to love this guy, right? That's the big joke.
He's number 1 on the board. He's number 1 on their board right now.
20 years old, Jihad Campbell out of Alabama. He was the best player on the Tide's defense in 2024, wreaking havoc. He piled up 117 tackles to go with a team high 11.5 tackles for losses, 5 sacks. He's 6'3". He's 245 pounds. He's expected to run the 40 in the low 4.4s. And Bruce Feldman is told he could excel in all of the other categories as well. I mean, I get it. We have edge rusher needs. We have IDL needs. We have cornerback needs. We have safety needs. This defense just needs youth. It needs playmakers. It needs speed. And if one of these 2 guys just falls into your lap at pick 30, I'm so sorry, but I would be so game to draft either of these guys, because to me, they could be future all pros. Like they are that good. They have no business dropping to 30, but position value, I think, could drop them.
And can you imagine if this was the year that we had to replace Tremaine Edmonds? Everybody would be all over this guy. It'd be like the Jet. It'd be like the Jack
it would be
Campbell
trade up into the
of years.
top 15 for him. It would be that's the conversation would be.
Yeah, and I mean, as people are saying in the comment, like the moment here in the comment section saying like a playmaker would be nice, and it's almost like you just need a playmaker somewhere, right?
Mhm.
And it may not seem evident that it's a position that's really needed at some point. Whether it's Milano, he's going to be aged out. The Bills likely are going to give Bernard a second contract, but we don't know, right? And many people would think it's a waste of a pick. But at the end of the day, you need a playmaker on the defensive side of the ball in some form or another. And if you think he's the best playmaker on the board, I'm not saying it's an impossibility, right? I don't think it's likely, but it's not an impossibility.
Then you go even further into the defense and we go to cornerback now. And obviously the Buffalo Bills could have a huge need at boundary corner if Rasul Douglas is not re-signed. And one name that sticks out to me, a guy who will not be testing this week, but he will be there interviewing. He will be there doing medicals. He should be good by training camp, is Savone Revel, the cornerback out of ECU. If you feel comfortable with the injury, right, and you think he's going to get fully back to 100%, this is a guy in Savone Revel who doesn't have a lot of reps in college football, but I mean, he's kind of an Antonio Cromartie type of athlete. He's just so effortlessly athletic. Does he need to refine a lot of things about his game? Yes, he does. But Sean McDermott has turned like these late round picks, like the Levi Wallaces and the Dane Jacksons of the world, into serviceable players. Imagine him with the ball of clay that is Savone Revel. Right? There's not many cornerbacks every year who you can look at and say, he's got the ceiling to play man, to play zone, to shadow number one receivers, like to just do everything a bona fide stud cornerback does. Savone Revel Jr. is that guy. Bruce Feldman's write up. Scouts told me they're surprised Revel is still with the Pirates and that a Power 4 program didn't do everything they could to lure him away from ECU. He is that talented. He started all 12 games for ECU in 2023, making 54 tackles with 3.5 tackles for loss alongside 12 passes broken up. A former high school track standout, Revel ran a 6'9", 55-meter dash time, but really got on the Pirates' wish list after he ran a 4.40 and broad jumped 11 feet during a summer camp. At 6'3", 190 pounds, Revel has ideal size for an NFL corner. Pirates cornerbacks coach Jules Moneter, who has worked at Alabama, Georgia, and Florida, said Revel can run in the 4.4, 4.3s and has great change of direction. He's tough, physical tackler and loves football. He has great character. Expect to hear Revel's name a lot in the run-up to the 2025 NFL draft. This is a guy who could have gone to top 15, right? Maybe he sees the small school Quinyon Mitchell drop, but also the fact that he was injured drop. If he falls into the Buffalo Bills lap at pick 30 and they're comfortable with the medicals, this is a guy who probably shouldn't be there at pick 30 and another guy the Buffalo Bills might be extremely tempted to take a chance on.
Yeah, Ashley's brother, my brother-in-law, is an ECU alum. Revel was his favorite player on the team.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, I know that it's just anecdotal, but it's like he saw how good he was. He was shocked that he stayed. I fully expected him to transfer given the situation in college football right now, but the fact that he did stay is pretty interesting. And look, I know ECU is not like a powerhouse in the college football landscape, but they've had some talent come through the NFL, Chris Johnson and others. So it's not like they're devoid of talent at ECU. They've gone through a lot of different coaches as well in recent years. They've had a lot of coaching changes, a lot of turmoil in the program. For him to stick it out, to me, that tells me that he is a dedicated player. And yeah, I think if the medicals and the injury history kind of check out, he would be someone that could be a steal when we look back at this draft in a few years.
Moving now to the very back end of the defense, the safety position, I think the name that most people in Bills Mafia are going to be talking about after the combine, if they're not already talking about him, is South Carolina safety Nick Amanwari. Again, this guy I'm going to talk about some of his projected testing numbers in a moment, but they're going to be ridiculous. And like, Javon Walker, like Jahad Campbell, like Siobhan Revel, just a good, young, fast athlete. I know safety, because we have Cole Bishop and Taylor Rapp, might not be the highest of priorities compared to other positions. Adding speed and athleticism and youth to this defense, that just needs to be the priority. Here's Bruce Feldman's write-up on Eamon, the safety out of South Carolina. For a while, he was the best kept secret in the SEC. He made 156 tackles in his first 2 seasons of college football, including 24 in 2 games against Georgia. He was number 11 on the 2024 Freaks list after he put up spectacular numbers last offseason. Broad jumping 11.4, vertical jumping 42 inches, and completing 24 reps of 225 pounds on the bench press, in addition to squatting 565 pounds. The former 3-star recruit was lights out again last season, earning first-team All-America honors after leading the team with 88 tackles to go with 4 interceptions and 3 tackles for loss. He turned 21 just this month.
Mm-hmm.
Here's all the kicker, right? I've mentioned all these freaky testing numbers. 6'3", 220 pounds, and he ran, as Bruce Feldman was told, a 4.35 while training in the 40 this past week. So Nick Eamon is going to be, again, another guy that is going to get first round talk, is going to get Bills specific first round talk. Dude's an absolute freak.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't know about the first round, but I think easily second round. Like, again, he could be. Like, we'll just see what happens. He did double his interception total from 2023 to 2024. Had 4 picks in 2024 after having 2 in 2023. You mentioned the tackle numbers: 244 tackles across 3 seasons at South Carolina. Just ridiculous, all over the ball. A tackling machine. 7th highest tackling grade in 2024 per PFF draft eligible safeties with at least 400 defensive snaps. The guy is a tackling machine, and he can get it done in the run game. And you add that athletic ability and that speed in defending the pass, and you might have yourself something special there with Eamon.
Shifting now to the offense, one of the freaks who's expected to put up some really big numbers in Indy, he might move himself from a day 3 prospect to a day 2 prospect. So he might take himself out of consideration for the Buffalo Bills. But if the Buffalo Bills are looking for James Cook insurance, there's a guy out of Virginia Tech who's got return chops. He could inject some speed. He could be a nice little insurance policy for James Cook to complement a guy like Ray Davis. That is Bashul Tutin. Here's what Bruce Feldman had to say about Tutin. One of our favorite freaks to watch the past few years. Tutin, a former North Carolina A&T player, can fly. Last offseason, the 5'11", 208-pounder clocked a 4.32 40 and reached 23 miles per hour max velocity. On top of all of that, he benched 400 pounds and had a vertical jump of 39 inches. In 2024, he was tied for 3rd in the nation with 4 runs of 50-plus yards. That season, he averaged more than 6 yards per carry and went for 1,159 yards and 15 rushing touchdowns. He's also a return guy. Tutin is a guy who, if he's still there round 4 and the Bills have filled some holes, could be pretty interesting as insurance for James Cook and as a complement to Ray Davis in the future.
Yeah, we talk about adding playmakers on defense. Like, wouldn't hurt to add a guy like that on offense. You mentioned all the stuff on related to the freak list. I mean, PFF 3rd best elusive rating in 2024, which essentially factors in missed tackles force over design run attempts and yards after contact. So 6th highest yards after contact per attempt of any running back in the class with at least 100 rushing attempts, 4.16 yards per attempt after contact, and chipped in with 23 catches in 2024 as well. So definitely a guy that I will have my eye on as a either James Cook replacement beyond 2025 or just adding another playmaker to this offense.
Shifting now to the wide receiver position, there are 3 guys who made Bruce Feldman's freak list who could have interest to the Buffalo Bills if they are looking to add another wide receiver, specifically if they're looking to add another boundary wide receiver. These 3 guys, in my opinion, who just happen to make themselves onto Bruce Feldman's freak list, to me, are jockeying at the combine to be top 40 picks. So whether it's late first round, early second round, these 3 guys are really jockeying for position in that second tier of wide receivers. The first is a guy who had a really big Senior Bowl week. That's Jaden Higgins out of Iowa State. Here's what Bruce Feldman had to say about Higgins. The Miami native began his college career at Eastern Kentucky before transferring to the Ames and lighting up the Big 12. In 2024, he had 87 catches for 1,183 yards and 9 touchdowns. At 6'3" and 217 pounds, Higgins is fast, explosive, and long with an almost 80-inch wingspan. I would not be surprised if he runs a lot faster than many expect. And if he does, start thinking about that first round talk. The next guy on the list is a guy I know you are a huge, huge fan of, and that is Elic Amanor out of Stanford, the 22-year-old from Medicine Hat, Canada. Ran a 10.76 100 and a 21.66 200 at Massachusetts Deerfield Academy and had a breakthrough game in 2023 against Colorado and Travis Hunter. Amanor torched the Buffs for a Cardinals record 294 receiving yards and had 13 catches on the day as Stanford rallied from down 29-0 to beat Colorado. In 2 seasons at Stanford after redshirting, the 6'2", 210-pounder had 125 receptions for 1,844 yards and 12 touchdowns. He is expected to run in the low 4.4s, maybe high 4.3s. Again, another guy, especially because he can get after it as a run blocker, play the boundary. He could really put himself in consideration late round 1. And then the last one is super polarizing prospect for me, a guy that I wouldn't touch in the first 2 days of the draft, but I know a lot of people would. And that is Savion Williams out of TCU, the 6'5", 225-pounder receiver is coming off his best season, catching 60 passes for 611 yards and 6 touchdowns. He had 51 carries for 332 yards and 6 more touchdowns. In addition, he was 3 for 3 passing for 22 yards and a touchdown. He has size, athleticism, which are eye-catching. Last offseason, he had 10.6 on the broad jump and posted a 40-inch vertical. He squatted 600 pounds. Bench 335, power clean 350, and clocked 22.5 miles per hour. And it shouldn't have been a big surprise that he was a weapon throwing the ball because he is a former high school quarterback who has a strong arm and his teammates say can throw a ball 80 yards. A lot of Cordarrelle Patterson comparisons for Savion Williams. To me, he looks like maybe Sammy Watkins-ish out there. And I think a lot of people are going to be enamored with his athleticism, but as Claude Puy says, very raw. But these are 3 guys who are jockeying for positions in the top 40. And if the Buffalo Bills decide like, hey, we want a wide receiver on top of Matthew Golden and Trey Harris, who we're going to talk about, these 3 guys could enter the chat as well.
Yeah, I'm not sure where I'm landing yet on Williams. They used him in the Wildcat, as you mentioned. They ran the ball with him 50 plus times this year. I worry a little bit about his change of direction ability. But he did catch a TD in the Senior Bowl game, and he has some good advanced metrics on contested catch percentage, especially versus man coverage. His hands were good. He had, second best drop grade on a per target basis of anyone in the class with at least 85 targets. But I don't know if all that extra stuff is really doing it for me, as opposed to a more polished guy, like Amanor, who to me, I think of those 3 guys would be the highest on my board right now. So cool to see all these guys on the freak list. Amanor would be my highest right now. I felt like he looked like the smoothest and the strongest at the point of the catch to me, and watching a couple of the games from each of these guys as I went through. Obviously, everyone's going to remember that awesome one-handed catch he made against Syracuse this year. But he gives me a little bit of like mini Drake London vibes, is the kind of the vibes I get from him. Steady and reliable, back-to-back 60 catch seasons, second team all the ACC in 2024. And his depth of target is pretty good. 14.2 average depth of target was the 11th highest of draft eligible wide receivers with at least 80 targets. So it's going to be interesting to me with him. What is he going to look like on some of the athletic testing as far as the speed stuff, right? I think that's where people are going to check for him. But right now, in the early goings, he's my wide receiver 5.
We also talk about maybe taking a risk on someone later on in the draft, and we'll talk about a ton of different wide receivers as we get back to the receiver position and talk about maybe some of the guys who weren't on Bruce Feldman's freak list, but 3 guys that popped on Bruce Feldman's freak list if the Buffalo Bills are looking to add an injection of speed on day 3 of the draft. Isaac Tesla from Arkansas, 6'2", 212 pounds, He's been testing very well in training ahead of the combine and is expected to vertical jump 40 inches and broad jump 10.7. He's running the 40-yard dash in the mid 4.4s, which are impressive numbers for a big wideout. Daquan Felton out of Virginia Tech, 6'4" and 1/4 and 222 pounds with 33-inch arms. It's expected that he's going to broad jump around 10.8 while running a 4.2 and having a 36.5-inch vert. So some pretty good testing numbers. Expect Felton to be a guy that maybe you start to do a little bit more research on as a day 3 option. And then Arian Smith, who was a track star at Georgia for years, decided just recently to focus solely on football. 6 foot, 185 pounds. He is believed to be the guy who is going to possibly be the highest 40 of the combine and run in the 4.2s. So if you're looking for a 4.2 guy this year in the draft, Arian Smith out of Georgia might be your guy. So a couple of options later on in the draft for the Buffalo Bills to consider.
And if you're wondering why maybe a guy like that isn't higher, it's because his hands are not the best. So he might be fast, and he's gonna have to show like the gauntlet drill is.
Remember Anthony Schwartz a couple of years ago from Auburn?
Oh yeah,
he's still in the league. That speed is still in the league somehow.
Yeah, but watch Arian on the gauntlet drill. See if he can handle those passes.
All right, so that was a cruise through, and by a cruise I mean a 40-minute segment of guys on Bruce Feldman's freak list. So now let's take a gander back to the defense and talk about some guys who did not make Bruce Feldman's freak list. We've already talked a little bit about Joshua Farmer, Kenneth Grant. We've talked a little bit about Walter Nolan, Jordan Phillips, Tyleek Williams. So we've already discussed or briefly mentioned some of these guys, but is there anyone else, Dave, you want to keep talking on in terms of IDL prospects who you're going to have your eye on this week in Indianapolis?
Yeah, I think a big, two big names on a lot of people's list as far as Bills fans are Alfred Collins and Derek Harmon. Those are two names that are definitely going to be on my, going to be keeping my eye on both of those guys. Harmon, Eric Turner, obviously from Cover One, did a lot of good film cut up already on Harmon, showcasing his strength at the point of attack, his ability to be disruptive, third best pass rush grade in 2024 of interior defensive lineman with 300 snaps, most hurries of any interior defensive lineman in this class. So Harmon is a guy that if he tests well athletically, he's going to start moving up my board. We talk about Birch, Morgan and so for me, I'm also going to be looking at Harmon from Oregon, and then Alfred Collins, who a lot of people are now kind of coming around to. We talked again about other Texas guys, but again, athletically, how's he going to test? 6 batted balls in 2024 was the most of any interior defensive lineman in the class. He's obviously kind of been known as a good run stopping defensive lineman. What's he going to give you as a pass rusher? I do worry a bit that his run stopping ability is a little bit overstated, but we're talking about athletic testing here for the combine. Let's see kind of how he puts up on some of the strength numbers. So Alfred Collins and Derek Harmon are two guys certainly I'll have my eyes on.
There's so many to choose from. Like in the comment sections, do you like Deion Walker? We have Jamari Caldwell from Oregon, Darius Alexander from Toledo. Yeah, like I sort of broke it up. I'm like, well, let's go by round here and let's look at like which round, which guy. If you're looking at round 2-3 options, Darius Alexander out of Toledo, just completely like, again, Sean McDermott talks about explosive. This is a guy who was explosive, blew up the Senior Bowl. Some people were saying like, oh, there's a snap here, a snap there, where it's like, are you looking at Chris Jones? That's what people say when they look at Darius Alexander, or we're looking at Darius Alexander at Senior Bowl, not comping him to him, but people were like, man, there's flashes of that. Obviously, he's an older prospect. Obviously, he played in lower level competition at Toledo, but he's a guy to keep an eye out at the combine. Does he blow it up with testing numbers? Deion Walker, obviously, the guy is huge. Everyone knows how big he is. What are his agility numbers going to look like at that size? You have issues with his leverage. Can he keep his pad levels low? I know the Buffalo Bills had like, and this is a bad comp because he weighs less, but like Jervon, that's just because Deion Walker's so freaking huge, right? The Bills loved like Jervon Dexter a couple of drafts ago, and I kind of get that vibe from Deion Walker, where it's like not the most technically sound guy, but just kind of relies on being a natural athlete and just goes out there and make plays. If Deion Walker can go and he can blow up the testing numbers, and he can convince people that he's coachable, and coaches can convince themselves that they can change things about Deion Walker's game and work on that leverage, maybe he's in play at pick 30, right? Like he's got that kind of athleticism. And then other guys in round 2 to 3, TJ Sanders is another guy to keep an eye on. Omar Norman Lott out of Tennessee is a guy to keep an eye on. So many. Shamar Turner out of Texas A&M. I'm not so much high on him, but so many guys in the 2nd to 3rd round to keep your eye on. Then you start thinking 4th round. We already talked about Joshua Farmer. You got CJ West, who we talked about doing our Shrine Bowl recap.
Like CJ West, yeah.
I know you like CJ West. JJ Pegasus out of Ole Miss. So many Ole Miss guys, or Pegways, excuse me. Aeneas Peebles, a 3-tech out of Virginia Tech. Just so many different guys. Anyone else stick out to you, maybe as a 2nd or 3rd round option, or a 4th or 5th round option that you just really want to talk about here?
Yeah, West was going to be the main guy. I like Peebles. I do think like he's going to be, like you said, more of a 3-tech, sort of more of a direct backup to Oliver, but they've got Dwayne Carter. So I'm not sure, even though I like him as a prospect, that I'd want to go maybe a different direction. And so that's why I'm looking at guys like CJ West, Alfred Collins, that type. But CJ West is definitely a guy who I'm going to have my eye on. I had him highlighted sort of in my notes from recapping the Shrine Bowl, and want to continue to keep my eye on him. Pegues, I can never say that guy's name. I'm also interested in him a bit. I think he really improved from 2023 to 2024. Had 24 hurries in 2024, which was the 12th most of all interior defensive line in the class. 6'2", 325. So he could be a nice fit, sort of as that backup 1-tech. And so I've kind of been going to keep my eyes on these guys that are in that kind of 310 to 330 pound range, I think, as the sort of Bills have traditionally gone in that sort of weight range, size range for their 1-tech players. So that's kind of the group of guys I'll be keeping my eye on.
Shifting now, and there's so many defensive tackles. I mean, this class is so loaded. We haven't even talked about like Cam Jackson from Florida, Ty Robinson from Nebraska, Tim Smith from Alabama, who I know Eric Turner is a huge fan of, Jay Toya from UCLA, Nazir Stackhouse from Georgia, Howard Cross from Notre Dame. Like the list goes on. This is a stacked class. I really hope the Buffalo Bills do double dip here at defensive tackle. Let's shift now to other edge prospects. We've touched on Jordan Birch. We've touched on Mike Green, Landon Jackson, James Pierce Jr., Nick Skirton, Barron Sorrell, David Walker, Mykal Williams, some other round 1 options that we haven't really touched on yet. Donovan Izaraku out of Boston College. And I meant to touch on Princely Omanmillion out of Ole Miss. Did I touch on him when we talked about Landon Jackson? I don't think I touched on him. The thing about, and I missed it just in my show notes because we had so many, I think Princely Omanmillion from Ole Miss could be in play for the Buffalo Bills at 28. This is a guy, and I don't know, he could also just be completely off the Buffalo Bills board. When it comes to pass rusher, he's right up there with Mike Green, and he's right up there with James Pierce. And you look at him as a pass rusher and you think to yourself, like, this guy gets after the quarterback. That is a trait I want. But the thing with Princely is he doesn't run defend for shit. Like he just doesn't. So it's really a double-edged sword. Like he's a situational guy. And is that something the Buffalo Bills are interested? Do they think they could teach him to be more of a run defender? Because when you look at the metrics, he's just as good of a pass rusher as Mike Green. He's just as good of a pass rusher as James Pierce Jr. So it's going to be really interesting. 6'4", 255 pounds. He tied for the team lead with 10.5 sacks last season, had 13 tackles for losses. He's had 25.5 sacks and 38 tackles for losses in his college career. He's got elite get-off speed and bend. His coach is expecting to run in the 4.5s and have a 10-yard split that should be blazing. And again, back to that 10-yard split. Sean McDermott talked about explosiveness. If Princely Omanmillion from Ole Miss has a big 10-yard split, right, could the Buffalo Bills be, ensorcelled by that pass rush ability enough to consider him at pick 20, pick 30? And then again, if he's still there, sitting there at the end of the 2nd round, which I doubt.
Yeah, 3 straight seasons of double-digit tackles for loss. You mentioned he led the team in 10.5 sacks this year. I like him, right? And I think that if you're kind of out on Mike Green or like he's already gone and you're really maybe not sold on a guy like Jack Sawyer or Shamar Stewart, then yeah, I mean, I think Princely could be an option, right? And I think in an ideal world, if the Bills were interested in him, they could get him with their earlier of their second round picks, but I'm just not sure that he will make it right now. Right now, PFF has him as their 40th overall prospect. So kind of right in that early second round range. So you wonder if they do want him, if they'd have to take him at pick 30.
The other edge guy, and like this is how good again this defensive line class is. We haven't even talked about Donovan Izaraku from Boston College. He's big testing day for him in Indy. Could be the difference between in play for Buffalo at pick 30 and in play for Buffalo at pick 56.
Yeah, he's one of my favorites in this class. And again, he's the more of that true pass rushing type of guy. He led this class. He led the edge class in quarterback hits in 2024 with 20 quarterback hits, had 14 sacks, which was tied for third most in the class. And again, like he's listed on their college site at 6'2", 247. What I'm interested in seeing in it with him at the combine, is he going to come in sort of at that 250 number, or is he going to come in lighter than that? Because you wonder about some of these guys who are listed on their college sites who are listed in the 240s or low 250s, if that's even embellished a bit. If he comes in and weighs like 235, 240, does that give you a little pause for concern? Listed at 6'2", does he come in under that? It'll be really interested to see his arm length and to see if that's something that maybe kind of bolsters his measurements a bit. So definitely interested. He should be in play. Him and Princely both are kind of neck and neck for me right now.
And then you look at some of the second, third round options, and for the Buffalo Bills, they would just be second round options. Some of the guys jockeying to maybe be in play if the Buffalo Bills pass on an edge rusher at pick 30, Kyle Kennard out of South Carolina, Jared Ivey out of Ole Miss, and then the 2 Ohio State guys who some people want to say are first round picks. I don't buy it. To me, they're rotational edge rushers, but they've had huge college football playoff games and they might test well in Indy. And man, if the Bills pick one of these 2 guys at 30, I think it would be a mistake, but I wouldn't hate it in the back half of the second round. Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimalu from Ohio State. Kennard, Ivy, Sawyer, Tuimalu, Landon Jackson falls into that category as well, who we already discussed. What are some, second round guys that really you're honing in on?
I mean, Ivy, I've mentioned before. I like him. I'm going to be interested to see how he tests out. Is it a hot take to say that I like Tumalo more than I like Jack Sawyer? I mean,
I don't think it's a hot take. It's certainly a higher recruit, I think.
Yeah,
I think he's a higher star recruit.
Yeah, I like him more. I like JT more. Kennard, I like as well. Set a career high in sacks this year with 11.5, 16 tackles for loss. So he was a transfer. Obviously, he went to South Carolina after spending his early years at Georgia Tech. So another guy, as I mentioned before, transferred, produced. Like to see him test well athletically. This South Carolina defense has a ton of dudes. This defense was really stacked, and so cool to see that. Happy for Randy, our guy Randy, to see that. But Ivy is kind of the guy that I liked, but I also know that from a size standpoint, he's another one of those size guys. And if you were going to look to replace Gregory Rousseau potentially down the road, he would be a guy that I'd peg for that. But it's, again, gets back to like length and strength guys or bendy your edge type guys. And in my opinion, like the Bills, if they are intent on keeping Gregory Rousseau and they have AJ Epinesa under contract, then that's why I'm more interested in guys like Princely and Donovan from BC. So yeah, big time.
We mentioned David Walker already. Noah Sheldon comes in and says Ashton Gillette out of Louisville. I mentioned Baron Sorrell already out of Texas. If we're looking at maybe some day 3 guys, Olu Aladeo out of UCLA, kind of, I think, might be this year's Jalix Hunt, former off-ball linebacker, moved to edge rusher. Antoine Powell Ryland out of Virginia Tech, and a guy who gets a lot of love in the draft community that I don't see a lot of people talking about outside of the draft community, Braden Swinson out of LSU. These are all guys who could be in consideration for the Buffalo Bills on day 3. I know you have an affinity for, checking the notes here, Powell Ryland. Who are some guys maybe in that group you want to talk about a little bit?
Yeah, Powell Ryland, another guy, and like I just like, for whatever reason, I'm kind of drawn to these guys that have transferred. So he will transfer from to Virginia Tech from Florida before the 2023 season. So he played 2 seasons at Virginia Tech, had a very impressive 19 tackles for loss and 16 sacks in 2024 after having 15 tackles for loss and 9.5 sacks in 2023. So he really blossomed after he transferred. He's one of the top pass rush graded players and pass rush win percentage graded players. He's the only player in the top 13 in both pass rush grade and pass rush win percentage of draft eligible edge players with at least 250 pass rush snaps. So some of the advanced metrics looking pretty favorably for Powell Ryland. So the question will be, how will he test? Will his athletic ability shine through in the testing and potentially bump him up a little bit? So Powell Ryland, definitely a guy I'm keeping my eye on.
On to now, skimming through cornerbacks. We've already sort of briefly mentioned Benjamin Morrison when we talked about injuries, Maxwell Hairston when we talked about injuries, Quincy Riley when we talked about injuries, Siobhan Ravel when we talked about injuries. The Bills could possibly need a guy to come in and compete day one as number 2 corner. I think when you're looking at it, there's a number of guys here who testing could put them in position to be a first-round pick for the Buffalo Bills, or could put them in position to be a second-round pick for the Buffalo Bills. Those names are the aforementioned, Savone Revel. Medicals are the big thing for him. Benjamin Morrison, medicals are a big thing for him out of Notre Dame. But you got Azari Thomas out of Florida State, could test his way possibly into consideration for the Bills, either at pick 28 or 56. Trey Amos out of Mississippi State, Darian Porter out of Iowa State, who's just an absolute freak, and we could talk about him in a moment. Dorian Strong, Noel Williams, Maxwell Hairston, even Jahdae Barron, who a lot of people think is maybe a Brian Branch, Cooper DeJean, nickel type defender, overhang defender. There are so many options towards the top half of the draft. It'll be really interesting to see who separates themselves. From an athletic standpoint, though, I think the talk of the combine is probably going to be a guy like Darian Porter.
Yeah, Porter's a fun guy. I mean, obviously he was a former wide receiver, so you love the fact that he's got good hands for a defensive player, right? They always say if he was they always say, make that joke about corners, if they could catch better, they'd be receivers. Well, this is the opposite. This guy was a receiver and transferred or changed positions to corner, so the hands are there. 6'4", 200 pounds. That's what he's listed at on their team site. So again, these are all height, weights, things that we don't have the official combine measurements yet. I'll be expecting him to come in maybe more closer to 6'2", 6'3", maybe a shade under 200 pounds. We'll see, but he's a fun player for sure. And again, another one of those guys that you expect that he will test well as being a former wide receiver. He's a fun player. I know a lot of Bills fans are now starting to kind of catch on to Darian Porter and could work himself into, an early day 2, early round 2 type of slot. I don't know that he's a first rounder, but I certainly could see him being a second rounder.
Yeah, Jahdae Barron for me, it's going to be really interesting to see how he tests. I know a lot of people, again, think he's that sort of like nickel defender, like a Brian Branch. He played outside at Texas this year, played extremely well. He's played all over the defense. He's a leader. Like Sark just talks about what a leader he is. And I was listening to the NFL Stock Exchange podcast this week, and I think Trevor Sikkema has Barron as his number 2 corner above Will Johnson. He's really high on Jahdae Barron. Compared him to sort of like Stephon Gilmore, which is something that might be intriguing if you're the Buffalo Bills and you want to mix a little bit of man, a little bit of zone. Obviously, Jahdae Barron is probably going to be primarily a zone corner, but it doesn't mean he can't play in some man-to-man situations. The more reps he gets on the boundary, because he only did 1 year of it at Texas, the better he'll get. And he can age into sort of a Taron Johnson role or a safety role in the future if that is needed and the Bills want to get maybe younger at the cornerback position in 4 or 5 years down the road into his second contract. So when you look at it, a guy like Barron is super interesting. Can he test his way to coming off the board before 30? A lot of people think he's a top 15, 20 talent on tape, but does the athleticism match it? Could the athleticism drop him? I don't think Azari Thomas is going to test as well as people think. Trey Amos, I think that 40 will be interesting to talk about the long speed for him. Noel Williams, I'm really interesting to see how he tests. If Noel Williams tests really well, the Bills
Yeah.
scouted Cal a lot this year.
Yeah.
Noel Williams is a physical corner. I think he does a lot of things that the Buffalo Bills would be really intrigued in. I know our guy Eric Turner told me to shut up about Noel Williams to keep him a secret for Brandon Beane and company. If he tests well, which people don't think he will, Daniel Jeremiah said he doesn't think Noel Williams will test well. He was only a Shrine Bowl invite too. He wasn't a Senior Bowl invite. If Noel Williams tests well, he could be in play for the Buffalo Bills, I think, at the back end of round 2.
That Cal defensive backfield. I like Craig Woodson too, the safety.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, Noel Williams, that's an interesting one. Like if Eric's I didn't realize Eric had already done some film work on him. So that is certainly, if he's given his stamp of approval, that certainly has my stamp of approval if he's watched the extensive tape on Noel Williams. So for sure.
Some maybe round 4 beyond options. I like Kobe Bryant. I like Quincy Riley. I like Zy Alexander. I think that Zy Alexander will test really well. Not so sure what Kobe Bryant will do at his size and what Quincy Riley will do. If Quincy Riley tests really well, I would consider him at the high end of day 3. I think Za Frazier from UTSA is going to test very well. Tommy Hill from Nebraska, I think, is going to test really well. I also think he should move to safety. I don't think he's a cornerback. So it should be really interesting. There's a bunch of nickel corners I like too. The Bills don't obviously need a nickel corner. So guys like Upton Stout, not really going to talk about here in this situation, but any other cornerbacks you want to talk about before we move on to the offense here?
No, you mentioned Zy Alexander. He is a very intriguing one to me. He was one of the first studies I did of the cornerback group, and I'm still liking him quite a bit. Another South Carolina guy, O.D. Fortune. I'll be interested to see how he tests. Defensive MVP of the Shrine Bowl. Had some good advanced metrics as far as his coverage grades. No penalties called against him in 2024's 3 straight multi-INT seasons. So O.D. Fortune is another guy who I think at 6'1", 180 on the team site, how will he actually come in at that height, weight, around that? Because that is like right there, that is an archetype fit for the Bills at that size. So O.D. Fortune, another guy from South Carolina that I'm going to see how he tests.
All right, let's transition now to the offense. And obviously the big position on offense to talk about is wide receiver. We have there's a lot of guys I love, but we're not really going to talk about them a lot. Like we already mentioned, Jack Besh, Xavier Restrepo, Jalen Knoll, like the power slot or the pure slot guys. With Khalil Shakir here, it's kind of a redundant skill set, at least for Restrepo and Knoll. So if the Bills draft him, cool, we'll have a conversation about it. We'll have a conversation about the fit. But in terms of previewing them, not going to touch on them so much. Likely off the board, Travis Hunter, Tet McMillan, Ibuka out of Ohio State, Luther Burden out of Missouri. So again, if they falls into the Bills' lap, cool, we can have that conversation. But some more realistic options for the Buffalo Bills at the tail end of round 2, or if they decide to pull the trigger on a guy in round 2, Matthew Golden out of Texas, Trey Harris out of Mississippi. We've already talked about Amaya Manur out of Stanford, Jaden Higgins out of Iowa State, Savion Williams out of TCU. You've got Jalen Royals. You've got Isaiah Bond. You've got Pat Bryant out of Illinois, Ty Felton, my guy out of Maryland, Tez Johnson, who blew up the Senior Bowl out of Oregon, but, under 160 pounds. The 40-yard dash, the gauntlet, the 10-yard split. If they decide to do the cone drills and the agility drills, which most of these receivers don't do anymore, the testing numbers could start to move some guys slightly up and down the board, not vastly, but they could move some guys and jockey some guys over the course of the weekend here.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to be interested to see about Jalen Royals, right? Because he's listed at 6 foot, 205, had all those glowing practice reports at the Senior Bowl. He seems like a really good all-around wide receiver, but I think his 40 time will be interesting. He, in the couple games I watched, reminded me a little bit of Amari Cooper. Obviously, he's a little bit shorter than Amari Cooper, but he did remind me a little bit of Amari Cooper. So I'll be interested to see how Royals tests. And then Pat Bryant, an interesting one. I think that he's another guy that you watch Illinois a couple of the games and you just feel like he's just always making a play. He's not super flashy, but he's always making a play. So is that going to come and shine through in the testing. We will see. I know someone asked it earlier in the comments section about Isaiah Bond. So he's an interesting one, right? Because he doesn't necessarily have the huge production
Dude, if he
history, right?
if he 4.2s, man.
Yeah. He, like, I'll say this. My notes on him right now before, like, doing extensive suddenness and speed that the Bills could use and could find interesting. Texas used him in a variety of ways. Felt a little like Josh Downs to me, but faster, better top end speed. And I won't question his toughness either. He seemed to always, go for extra yards. 50% of his yards came after the catch. So if he tests well, he only had 34 catches last year, right? So if he tests
he was
well,
dealing with an ankle injury though. So
yes, he had
down
an
year for
injury.
him.
Yes.
Ryan Tongan comes in and says Matthew Golden 58. Hells yeah, but I think him and Trey Harris are jockeying for tail end of the first round, if you ask me, with the way they test. And I think for Trey Harris, medicals, because I don't think he's had a full season of college football. So I think Trey Harris medicals might be something that's going to get tested out there. If Ty Felton can clock 4.4s, I'd be super interested in Ty Felton with the second of our second round picks. If the Buffalo Bills are looking for like a field stretching type, if he gets into the fourth round, I'm super interested in a guy like Ty Felton. I think he's that prototypical Z. I think he'd be a really good complement to the room. And then you look at guys who are maybe projected to go round 4. Your guy, Torrey Horton from Colorado State, who I really loved and kind of forgot about because he dealt with an injury this year. Ricky White, the third, 4-phase special teamer, downfield separator, UNLV. Really like his game. Another guy that you were very high on Senior Bowl week, Kyle Williams. Maybe he goes sooner, but I have him right now in sort of that early day 3 bubble. And then a guy we mentioned when we talked about Bruce Feldman's freaks and Daquan Felton. There are some intriguing names there in round 4, but talk a little bit about Horton and talk a little bit about Kyle Williams, because I know you like both of them.
Yeah, I mean, Horton's coming off the knee injury, had the season-ending knee injury in October, so the combine's going to be really important for him. I mean, this guy had 8 touchdowns in both 2022 and 2023, has a experience as a punt returner as well, 26 career punt returners. The one thing you look at him, he's like a little slender in the lower body, but he has good footwork, and he's got really good sideline awareness. So he's certainly a guy I'm rooting for. Transferred from Nevada, another transfer guy from Nevada to Colorado State for the 2022 season, had back-to-back 1,100-yard receiving seasons in 2022 and 2023, had a ridiculous 96 receptions in 2023. So I think people are forgetting about Torrey Horton because of that injury he had halfway through this year where he missed basically half the season, but now he gets a chance to go to the combine and kind of show his athletic ability. So definitely a guy that's sort of on my radar. And Kyle Williams, I talked about him during Senior Bowl week, but he was one of Daniel Jeremiah's 12 standouts from Senior Bowl practice, 14 touchdowns in 2024. Again, what is he going to come in at? He's measured at, I think in the Senior Bowl, he came in at 5'10", 182. So a little shorter. If he runs fast at the combine, I think that will really help his case, because I think the reason he's not higher right now is 1, because of his size, and 2, because he's not blazing fast, but he just does everything else you want a receiver to do. So Kyle Williams, if he runs a good 40 time at the combine, I think he can solidify himself as an early day 3 type of player. Very interested in him. And as Noah Sheldon talks about Juice Wells in the comments, we're about to get to 3 of my other favorite guys that
you got some names that I don't even have, but some of my later round options, names that just intrigue me. We already mentioned Arian Smith, Isaac Tesla out of Arkansas, some speedy guys. Andrew Armstrong out of Arkansas. He has a lot of fans in the draft community. I always liked Elijah Badger at Arizona State. He transferred to Florida, kind of went quiet. Ja'Cory Brooks, the Alabama transfer to Louisville. He's got some downfield speed. Jimmy Horn has got that slot speed. He's such a quick dude. Just a nice little gadget. I don't even want to say gadgety, but just a quick guy, but he's small. Right. Jimmy Horn. So you got Kanata Mumfield, Nick Nash. You mentioned Juice Wells out of Mississippi. It's not a deep receiver class in my opinion. But there are some intriguing names and some diamonds in the rough here on day 3. I know you want to talk about Juice Wells. Who are some other guys that really interest you there?
Yeah, like Juice Wells. Obviously he transferred as well away from South Carolina to Ole Miss. Keandre Lambert Smith from Auburn, another transfer after spending his first years at Penn State. 981 yards and 8 touchdowns in 2024 were both career bests for him. He thrived in that Auburn offense. A good, solid day 3 vertical threat option for the Bills. I expect him to run a good time. 19.6 yards per reception in 2024, which is an improvement over his 12.7 yards per reception in 2023. So almost basically a 7-yard improvement in yards per reception, played out wide 85% of his snaps. So a good wide vertical threat. And Ricky White, I think you mentioned him in the round 4 options, but certainly want to mention him again because I think he could be another day 3 guy. In his last two years at UNLV, 88 catches for 1,483 yards and 8 touchdowns. Follow that up. Yeah, go ahead.
When you're filling out a wide receiver room too, just 4-phase special teamer. I keep coming back to that.
Mm-hmm.
The guy can not only contribute as a wide receiver and a field stretcher, he can play teams too.
Exactly. So in 2023, 88 catches for 1,483 yards. He followed it up in 2024 with 79 catches for another 1,000 yards and 11 touchdowns. 4 punt returns in 2024, including 1 for a touchdown. He was only one of 6 draft-eligible wide receivers with 1,000 yards and 10 receiving touchdowns. So for a guy that you're going to get on day 3, you can't do much better from a production standpoint than a guy like Ricky White from UNLV.
All right, let's shift our focus now to just some other positions, maybe not major positions of need for the Buffalo Bills, but just other positions where the Bills could draft a guy. And one of those positions, in my opinion, is running back, right? Like the Bills have 3 running backs plus Frank Gore Jr. They're decently set. Obviously, we have the James Cook issues right now, but this running back class is disgusting. Like, we're not even going to talk about any of the top guys today. We're not talking about the Omarion Hamptons of the world. We're not talking about the Ashton Genties of the world. We're not talking about any of those dudes right now. Just strictly talking about guys who maybe test their way into day 2, are day 3, early day 3 guys who could fall to the back end of day 3 just because of how loaded this class is. Someone I think described it perfectly. They said it's like 2 running back classes in one. It's so disgusting. Like, where do I even start? Like, there are running backs I like in pass protection. LaQuint Allen out of Syracuse is also a pretty good pass catcher. You got Kyle Managai out of Rutgers, pretty good pass blocker. There are some people who love Cam Scatterbu as a pass blocker, some people who don't, but Cam Scatterbu is a 4-phase special teamer, a guy who shows willingness as a pass blocker, a guy who's a pass catcher, a guy who's got probably the best contact balance of any running back in the country. You have speedy pass catchers and Jaden Blue out of Texas, Donovan Edwards out of Michigan, Jaquez Hunter out of Auburn, Brashard Smith, the former wide receiver out of SMU, and the guy Tootin that we talked about earlier in the freaks list from Virginia Tech. And then you just have like the others list, right? You got Trevor Etienne, who I think just does everything solid and is pretty underrated, out of Georgia, brother of Travis Etienne, DJ Giddens out of Kansas State, Ali Gordon out of Oklahoma State, RG Harvey out of UCF, Corey Kiner out of Cincinnati, Woody Marks out of USC, Damian Martinez out of Miami, Devin Neal out of Kansas, my favorite running back in this draft, and Dylan Sampson out of Tennessee. I mean, like, we're not even talking about the Travion Hendersons of the world, the Quinshon Junksons of the world. Like, there's like 30 draftable running backs in this class. It's insane. To me, it would be crazy for the Buffalo Bills not to walk out of this draft with like just a consolation running back at the end. And Jaden Blue, I love him. Brashard Smith, I really love him. If Devin Neal drops in this draft, I love Devin Neal. Like, just
big Devin
everywhere
Neal
you
fan.
look, running back. Where are some guys that stick out to you here?
I mean, my dad's a Kansas guy, so of course I like Devin Neal. My dad isn't even like a football guy, and he watched football this year because of Devin Neal. So that tells you what you need to know.
I saw
about
Devin Neal in person this year. He is so fun. He is so fun.
One of my favorites, you kind of mentioned him in the list, but Jarquez Hunter from Auburn is one of my favorites. Great contact balance. I'm curious about his short area quickness. I know he's got the long speed, he's got the top end speed when he gets going, but I wonder about that just kind of in the phone booth quickness for him. It'll be interesting to see his shuttle. I think is going to be interesting if he runs that, if he does the shuttle. But I like Jarquez Hunter. You mentioned Brashard Smith had the highest receiving grade of any running back per PFF with at least 100 rushing attempts in this class. He had 41 catches. So if you're looking for a guy that can catch the ball, maybe replace a guy like Ty Johnson. Graded out pretty well as a pass blocker, by the way, Brashard Smith from SMU. So if you're looking for that kind of receiving back, who can also maybe come in and fill that Ty Johnson role. If the Bills don't re-sign Ty Johnson, Brashard Smith is a pretty good guy to look at. A guy that I'm happy got invited to the combine, Marcus Yarns from Delaware. Obviously played against lesser competition, but 65 career catches there. Doesn't have a lot of tread on the tires, only 3 fumbles in his entire career. Had 34 15-plus yard runs over the past 3 seasons. I like him. I wonder about the competition. I wonder how he'll test, but I'm happy that he got invited to the combine. A lot of guys in the running back room that there's just so many.
Because like there's so many like overall like just good runners, like Dylan Sampson could drop, Woody Marks, RJ Harvey, Ollie Gordon, DJ Giddens, Trevor Etienne. Like those are like traditional running backs, and I like all of them. If the Bills were to take one of them because they found it like the 5th or the 6th round, like yes, please, thank you. But I'm kind of finding myself drawn to the niche running backs. LaQuint Allen out of Syracuse because of his pass catching ability and his pass blocking. Jaden Blue because of his breakaway speed. Jaquez Hunter because of his breakaway speed, Brashard Smith because of his ability as a pass catcher, Bashal Tootin because of his ability as a returner, a pass catcher, a pass blocker, an explosive runner. I don't even want to call them niche guys because I do think they are decent overall running backs. But thinking about the future of the Buffalo Bills running back room, I will take any of these guys gladly because they're all good. But maybe not so much like the Rocket Sanders or like the bigger guys like the Taj Brookses. Maybe not so much those guys because we have Ray Davis, but I'll take any of these. They're all good. You can't go wrong with any of these guys, but it's the speedy pass catching, pass blocking. Like those are the ones that really have been drawing my interest because I can't spend too much time at this position this offseason. Those are the guys that have my attention, and Cam Scatterboot, because I've seen that man play probably 24 times in person and he's just a beast. But yeah, this position is just disgusting. Absolutely disgusting.
Yeah.
Speaking of another position, well, let's shift to the defensive side of the ball. I don't know how much you have to talk on this because I know you said you haven't really gotten to the position yet, but there are some linebackers that I like in this draft class. It'll be interesting to see. Testing is really important for linebackers. There are some linebackers who have great tape who go undrafted because they're like, well, he's just not a good enough athlete to survive in the National Football League. Jeffrey Bassa, I really love out of Oregon, former safety turned linebacker. Teddy Buchanan, I think, is a guy the Buffalo Bills could get late to add depth to the room. Jack Kaiser, doesn't hurt to have 2 farmers on the team, right? Jack Kaiser is a farmer, Notre Dame guy. Josh Allen is a farmer, right? They could get along. Demetrius Knight Jr. out of South Carolina had a big week at the Senior Bowl. A lot of fans for him. Corey Lindenberg out of Minnesota. Nick Martin out of Oklahoma State. Kane Madrano, a former wide receiver turned linebacker at UCLA. Chris Paul Jr. from Ole Miss. Carson Schweisinger out of UCLA. To me, he's a first-round talent. Linebackers don't really get drafted in the first round anymore. He could be a real steal as an off-ball linebacker for somebody on day 2. Danny Strutzman out of Oklahoma. Jackson Woodard out of UNLV. I will have my eyes on all of those guys because I just think they're good linebackers. And if the Buffalo Bills decide if one of those guys is sitting there day 3, some of those guys won't. But if one of those guys is sitting there day 3 and the Buffalo Bills decide to pull the trigger, I won't be mad. The guy that really intrigues me is Corey Lindenberg. Made his way onto Bruce Feldman's freak list. This is what Bruce Feldman had to say about Lindbergh. A very good player on a very good defense. He was voted Big Ten coaches as a first-team all-league player after finishing with the team best 94 tackles, 5 tackles for losses, 6 passes broken up, and 1 interception. He has very good size at 6'3" and 240 pounds and has hit 21.46 miles per hour. He ran a 4 pro shuttle time last offseason. The last time an NFL linebacker prospect went that fast in Indy was 2019 when West Virginia's David Long did it in 3.97. Lindbergh broad jumped 10.0 and vertical jumped 36 inches and had a 10-yard split of 151. Lindbergh is a really good athlete. I think very highly of him and very highly of a lot of these linebackers. But at the end of the day, unless it's Jahad Campbell or Jalen Walker, day 3, please. But some linebackers that I like. Has anyone stuck out to you yet? I know you said you haven't really had a chance to look at linebackers yet.
No, basically I was using your list to know which guys I need to look into. So thank you for that. I have not. I've joked in the comment section. I have 100. I have notes on 152, like detailed notes on 152 players, and only one's a linebacker so
far. Let's move to a position you're more comfortable with, and that is safety. Yeah. Through the work that I've done, I have maybe a dozen safeties that I like. I'm just going to list all the ones that I like because those are the ones my eyes are going to be on in Indy. And essentially, if I don't list this guy, that's that's the players like, all right, of the guys I don't list, who sticks out in Indianapolis? Who do I need to go take a look at? Because again, I don't have a lot of time to be looking at these positions that maybe aren't of major need. I know all the big ones. I've studied the big ones. Who sticks out as a guy? Because whenever, and again, I'm not doing mock drafts publicly, but I sure as hell do about 2 a day privately that I will not share with anyone. But like every mock draft that I do, I don't like a lot. I don't know any of the safeties on day 3, and I don't like any of the safeties on day 3, and I don't draft any of the safeties on day 3. So who's going to step up as like a day 3 favorite of mine at the safety position? Right now, Hunter Wohlers out of Wisconsin is like the only one, and he might not even be a day 2 guy or a day 3 guy. He probably will, but he might not be. But Billy Bowman Jr. out of Oklahoma, Sebastian Castro out of Iowa, Nick Amonwori out of South Carolina, Malachi Moore out of Alabama, Andrew Mabuka from Texas, Lathan Ransom from Ohio State, Malachi Starks from Georgia, Xavier Watts from Notre Dame, Kevin Winston Jr. from Penn State, and Hunter Waller. Those are the 10 guys. That's all I got right now. I know you've got a few other guys than I do. Maybe in the comments section, you can tell me another safety that I'm sleeping on right now. Yeah, who do you got at safety?
Well, you mentioned 2 of my favorites, Makuba from Texas and Billy Bowman Jr. from Oklahoma are 2 of my favorites. I also like Malachi Moore, who I think we mentioned at the top of the show is maybe having some not off-field issues, but maybe a little bit of an anger management problem. But team captain in 2024 for Alabama, so he was voted a team captain. 5th best coverage grade of draft-eligible safeties with at least 400 defensive snaps. So Moore, very interested in seeing him. Mukaba, I'm kind of hoping, like, I'm not saying I hope he doesn't test well, but like I think he's going to be kind of in that round 3 range right where the Bills are not picking. So it'd be kind of nice if he fell a little bit. A couple other guys that I'm interested in watching, RJ Mickens from Clemson, 6 foot, 200 pounds on the team site. He's more of a box guy, but he could merge as a favorite after the combine. He did have the 2nd best coverage grade of any draft eligible safety with at least 400 snaps. So I was impressed with him on some of the games I watched as his. So RJ Mickens from Clemson is a guy I'll be looking at. And as far as other late guys, Dante Trader Jr. from Maryland. So he's 5 interceptions of his past 3 years. Very good tackling safety. I do think that his closing speed looked pretty good on a couple of the games I watched of his. The question will be kind of the back end range for him. So tried to focus more on guys that had sort of that back end range, which is why I like Moore, Bowman, Makuba are the 3 that really interest me. Wohler, you mentioned, is interesting. I wonder where he's going to end up playing, if he's kind of more like a Cole Bishop kind of line of scrimmage type of guy, but that guy's a football player. I mean, he just like, he's wherever a tackle needs to be made, he'll make the tackle. So safety's an interesting one because I don't think it's a necessarily exciting class, I would say. I don't think it's exciting. I like, people are going to love Watts. People are going to like Starks. I get that. But I don't know. Like, it's not.
Watts. I love Watts.
I don't think it's a. Yeah,
so
I
much.
do. I mean, he's the man. I don't think it's quite as good as last year when we're talking about guys like Bullard and that. Like,
I really like the names, but there's just not a lot of them. Kevin Winston Jr., if the medicals could be big for him too, because I heard there were some issues before the ACL. I mean, that's a guy the Bills could get in round 2 that maybe could have been a first rounder if he didn't get hurt from Penn State. Like, Lathan Ransom, solid safety. Like you mentioned Makuba, Malachi Moore, some temper issues. So he had some temper tantrums this year on the football field. He's got some off-field stuff that maybe he's got to talk through with some people. He's really solid. Billy Bowman could be like a Cam Lewis type of guy where he can be your backup nickel because he played a little bit of nickel at Oklahoma, but also can be a safety for you too. So just the versatility of the guy like Billy Bowman gets you from Oklahoma. Just, there are some good dudes in this class. There's just not a lot of them.
Yeah.
No, not Shiloh Sanders. Please go out and tell me that was a joke.
I mean, Billy Bowman had in 2023 had 6 interceptions. 3 of them were pick sixes. So he's got ball skills, 11 career interceptions. He's a guy that you don't necessarily want down making tackles in the run game, but if you're looking for ball skills on the back end and a center fielder,
what we have in the room, because we got Taylor Rapp, we got Cole Bishop.
That's what I'm saying. Like Bowman is a great compliment to what we have in the room. I think Makuba is a great compliment to what we have in the room. I don't know. Some of these schools like churn out certain positions that are just good in the NFL every year. And I know say don't scout the helmet, but like Texas and safeties like just go hand in hand. I mean,
Mhm.
it was Caden Stearns a couple years back, and I know his career hasn't necessarily panned out, but Texas
And
has a history of putting good safeties into the
Aaron Williams
NFL.
didn't know he was a safety until he became a
Yeah.
safety. Like he didn't know that he was destined to become a safety. Unfortunately, Jarvis Landry had to cut that career short. But wow, that's a sour note to end on. My apologies for that. But speaking of sour notes, I want to get these two combine snubs off my chest before we head out of here. First of all, Sean Dolak. Shout out to Sean Dolak. You should be in Indy this week testing with the linebackers. First team All-American. How disgusting is it that he did not get a Senior Bowl invite, a Shrine Bowl invite, a Hula Bowl invite, like a combine? Like what in the world does Sean Dolak have to do to get invited to anything other than the UB Pro Day? I mean, come on. That's absolutely insane. So just a shout out to Sean Dolak. I've been thinking about reaching out to him, maybe trying to interview him at some point in this pre-draft process just to get his whole thoughts on it. As a UB guy, you could tell with the name and nameplate over my shoulder here. That one hit me a little bit personally. And I really do think that the combine missed out on a crazy opportunity here. And I had to go back and double check to make sure he didn't go back to school, because I'm like, how did this guy not get invited with his name, with his backstory, with his Bruce Feldman Freaks List numbers? How the hell did Louisville defensive tackle Thor Griffith not get a invite to the combine in Indianapolis? For those of you who don't know who Thor Griffith is, what a name, first of all.
Yes.
He was a transfer from Harvard, has a degree from Harvard in economics. He is a nose tackle who absolutely clogs the middle of the field and stepped up this year at Louisville and showed a little bit of short area quickness and some good handwork and got after the passer a little bit. This is Bruce Feldman's write-up on Thor Griffith, the Louisville defensive tackle. After 3 seasons dominating the Ivy League for Harvard, piling up 132 tackles, 33.5 tackles for loss, and 13.5 sacks, the former New Hampshire State wrestling and hockey standout. Dude, how are they not inviting this guy to the draft? Has transferred to the ACC. He didn't do offseason testing at Louisville, but make no mistake that the 6'2", 320-pounder is one of the most explosive players in college football. Griffith has bench pressed, wait for this one, 225 pounds 45 times and ran a 4.95 40 with a 10-yard split of 165. In addition, he has clocked a 4.57 pro shuttle. In what world is this guy not in Indianapolis? And
well,
like
sounds like he doesn't need to be there with all those tests.
Like what is going on here?
Yeah,
like this
they
is
miss
crazy.
them every year. They miss a few, right? I mean,
Like,
you had the conversation with Nagy, right?
Yeah, like just the ratings alone for Thor Griffith. That's a guy you build a feature story around. Like that is insane. That's
you got multiple days to kill here in with the combine. You could have had a feature story.
They missed the mark there. With all the time you got to fill, they missed the mark there. All right. So thank you guys so much. We appreciate it. Old school, kicking it old school, went almost 2 hours this evening, but we had a lot to preview tonight on the show. There are 3 ways in which you can support us here at the Air Raid Hour. Number 1 is you can just simply smash that like button. It goes a long way, helps us with the algorithm. We would really appreciate it if before you leave, just smash that like button. The second way you can support us here is by clicking the share button, word of mouth. That's how we want to spread this thing here at the Air Raid Hour. We want people who enjoy what we are doing to click that share button and text, email, post on social media for their friends and family to come join us here at the Air Raid Hour. That's number 2. And then the third thing, once this video is done being live and it's on demand, leave a comment in the comment section of the video. It can be a prospect that we missed. It can be a criticism. It can be a note on things you think we can do better. It can just be a go Bills, whatever, and an emoji. Any comment really after the show is done being live helps us, again, drive that algorithm, gets us in front of more eyeballs. We do our best to go in and respond to people who comment as well. So that goes a long way. Thank you guys so much. Next week, we're back with combine reactions. So we get to break down the data. We get to look at the data. We get to look at the standouts. We get to look at the guys who maybe struggled a little bit, and we get to reassess everything that we talked about tonight. So looking forward to next week.
Yeah, our timing for our show is great. Being on a Monday, we'll get to come back right after the combine ends and recap everything. So good timing there. And look, I probably went through more stuff tonight than I even thought I was going to go through. But yeah, it's good to be prepped on these things, and glad you all joined us tonight. And yeah, comment section was great tonight. So thank you.
All right. Thank you guys so much. We really appreciate it. Have a great night. Enjoy your combine this weekend. Head on over to Picasso's Pizza, right? Order some Picasso's Pizza, eat some Picasso's Pizza while you're watching the combine, and let's get after it. My question to you, because I was going to start the show with like a binoculars and some popcorn. I realized that binoculars are kind of expensive and I didn't want to spend that kind of money on a prop. Do you think that they actually use those things? Like, do you think Brandon Beane is actually like, or do you think they just want to be memed at this point with the binoculars?
I just don't see, with like the technology and like iPads and all the cameras and everything, like what do you need binoculars for? Unless like you're trying to like read a guy's lips maybe when he's talking. Like
they're just trying to get memed, I think. They're just body language experts with binoculars at this point. All right. Sorry, that was just one random thought I had to get off my chest for out here. So thank you guys so much. And until next time, go Bills.
Go Bills.
Thank you for watching tonight's episode of the Air Raid Hour. Make sure to hit that like button on the way out. If you are catching the show on demand, leave a reply in the comments section and we will respond over the course of the week. You can always listen to every episode next day on all major podcasting platforms, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify, by searching Air Raid Buffalo. Thank you for your continued support, and as always, go Bills!